Hello, and welcome to the Way of the Lion Narnian Apologetics course. We are considering the Voyage of the Dawntreader as a way to think about witnessing to the egocentric. Last time we thought about scriptural reliability and how we can stand firm on the Bible. With this firm foundation in place, we are going to continue on our own voyage. Our learning aims in this session are to recognise and examine the value of Reepicheep's exemplary behaviour, consider biblical examples in terms of the fruit of the Spirit, and think about how we can see, be, and present an example to pre-Christians. So let's kick off with Reepicheep. Reepicheep leads by example. His example of quite unwarranted friendship offered to the bedraggoned Eustace won the creature over, preparing him to be undragoned by Aslan. His example to the Dufflepuds of paddling his coracle until they were intrigued demonstrated that which Coryakin, Eustace and even Lucy had failed to do logically, weakened the influence of their chief. A Narnia-inspired apologist might take St. Peter's advice in 1 Peter 2:12. Live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. We meet Eustace at the beginning of the book as a deeply unlikable creature. A sly, cowardly, dishonourable bully, he represents the very antithesis of the chivalrous mouse. Yet, when he is transformed by thinking greedy, dragonish thoughts on a dragon's golden hoard into a dragon, the first of the crew to befriend him anew is Reep. This forged a lasting bond between the two, which endured after Eustace's baptism and rebirth as a boy, right to the end. Eustace even began to do some brave acts, such as attacking a sea serpent, standing with the royal party on the terrifying approach to Dark Island, even volunteering to stay with his new friend Reepicheep at Aslan's table. To Eustace, Reep's counterattack was forceful, yet proportionate. In response to unacceptable behaviour towards him and the royal party, he offers Eustace an honourable duel. Eustace declines in the height of dishonour. The contemporary apologist, faced with one uttering unfounded blasphemies, might follow Reepicheep's proportionate example and respond with a forthright debate rather than with a rapier. Don't use a rapier. Lewis himself frequently defended his faith in this way at the Socratic Club, where he was president. Lewis wrote in the first edition of the Socratic Digest, "It was the Christians who constructed the arena and issued the challenge. We never claim to be impartial, but argument is. It has a life of its own. No man can tell where it will go. We expose ourselves and the weakest of our party to your fire, no less than you are exposed to ours." Another group worthy of consideration is the Dufflepuds. This bizarre race of beings is one Lewis probably drew from classical, ancient and medieval sources, including Pliny and Augustine. Lewis mentions them as terrorising the unparadised Adam in his poem of that name. Similarly, they terrorised the landing party on the island of the Voices. "They are certainly not very clever," correctly observes Eustace. Through the starman Coryakin, who Aslan gave authority over the island, they learned that the Dufflepuds are in open, unwarranted rebellion to him. Their circular rationale for this is telling. "This magician that I was speaking about, he told us to do something we didn't like. And why not? Because we didn't want to." Their conceit is due primarily to their chief. His leadership is indicative of his character. notably his inability to hold a reasoned conversation, which is compounded and exacerbated by the encouragement of his followers. It's only when Reepicheep speaks to them that the chief's power abates. I quote, "When they reached the bay, Reepicheep had a brilliant idea. He had his little coracle lowered and paddled himself about in it till the monopods, who were thoroughly interested. Then he stood up in it and said, 'Worthy and intelligent monopods, you do not need boats. Each of you has a foot that will do instead. Just jump as lightly as you can on the water and see what happens.'" Reepicheep stands here as a role model for the apologist to the deceived. There is a parallel with Matthew 14:22-33, wherein Christ's call breaks Peter's self-imposed enslavement to fear, and he steps out of the boat into the liberation of faith. This may cast Reepicheep as the archetypal apologist, in persona Christi, as it were. Reepicheep shows an alternative to the accepted norms and invites his audience to join him. To Eustace he shows honourable, egalitarian friendship, which lasts to the end. To the Dufflepuds he shows that there can be fun and jollity outside the chief's approval. To the Narnian reader he shows a way to follow Aslan with heart, head and tail. He invites us, with the psalmist, to taste and see that the Lord is good. An apologist would be well advised to make the same offer. One of Lewis's rationales for writing the Chronicles is found on 3 ways for writing to children, which is included in Of Other Worlds, Essays and Stories. I quote, "Since it is so likely that children will make cruel enemies, let them at least have heard of brave knights and heroic courage. Otherwise you are making their destiny not brighter, but darker." Reepicheep is, of course, one of the bravest of the Knights of Narnia. How can we make use of the Bible to give examples of faith and truth? Having undertaken the first task of showing that the Bible is a reliable historical document, unlike any other in the world, see part 1 of this book in this series, we can begin to build a case for the efficacy of Christianity. In my own journey, it was the example of the fruit of the Spirit which brought me to pray, "If this is real, I want some of it." I'm still growing fruit and it is far from ripe, but because I could see these things exemplified in Christian lives around me and in the Bible, I was convinced enough to taste and see. Galatians 5:22-23. "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law." A useful way to proceed is to look at each quality in turn and look at how this can be demonstrated to skeptics that the Bible is not, as I once assumed, an immoral book with no practical application. Our best example in all things is Jesus. In his teaching and his life, he demonstrated these qualities to the highest and purest degree. But he is not alone in the biblical record. There are others, such as David, Abraham and Job, who can provide a moral and spiritual example in some, if not all, particulars. Doubtless you can all think of more examples which you can leave in the comments section. But here are my examples of fruit. This section largely mirrors and confirms that found at ucg.org. Though the United Church of God are an Armstrongian heretical cult who deny the Trinity, their views are close enough to warrant inspiration for this section. Another useful resource I used for non-Jesus exemplars was the blog of the author Jeffrey Krantz, who looks a little bit like a ginger David Tennant. Maybe he'll be in the next Doctor Who. Who knows? Love. Jesus showed love most supremely by dying on the cross for us. He emphasized this in a very accessible way that even a skeptic could apprehend at the Last Supper. John 15, 9-15. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learnt from my Father has been made known to you. Other models of love include Ruth, who gave up her home, family, and gods to accompany her mother-in-law back to Israel. A consequence of her devotion was that she got a new husband. The original one had died, and is included in the genealogy of David and thus of Jesus himself. Also, Jonathan, King Saul's son, who recognized and loved David as a brother. He put himself in mortal danger and preferred David's friendship even over his own succession to the throne. Joy. The John 15 passage we just read has joy as a central theme. I have told you this that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. That this was accomplished at the resurrection is evidenced by Matthew recording the first words of the risen Christ as "Rejoice." Still at the Last Supper, in John 16, 20-22, we find, "Very truly I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. So with you, now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy." Jesus rejoiced. His disciples rejoiced, and we can rejoice in him and in his gospel for all to see. Joy is prevalent in many examples, sometimes quite unexpectedly. Paul, for example, writing to the Philippian church from prison, mentions joy a lot. He prays with joy, 1:4. He rejoices that Christ is preached, 1:18. He rejoices about his own future, though it looked pretty bleak from an earthly perspective, 1:18-26. He exhorts to make his joy complete by emulating him, 2:2. He asks to be cheered with news of them from Timothy, 2:19. He exhorts them to welcome Epaphroditus with great joy, 2:29. There are more examples in Philippians which I encourage you to find for yourself. The picture is of a Roman ruin in Philippi. Another model of joy, in spite of circumstances, is Nehemiah. Having just finished the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem against great odds and adversity, he tells his beleaguered and oppressed people, "Do not grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." The picture is of Nehemiah's wall as it remains in Jerusalem today. I took that picture. Joy in hard times is one of the things that marks Christians out in society, and is an inspiration for seekers. Peace. Every Christmas, we, and all Christendom with us, believing or otherwise, are reminded that Jesus is prophesied as the Prince of Peace. Isaiah 9:6. Earlier in the Lord's Supper, Jesus promises, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." John 14:27. This is really remarkable considering his impending torture and death, but still more remarkable is its fulfillment after his resurrection. John 20:19. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together, with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them, saying, "Peace be with you." Then he sends them out as missionaries in a fast-changing and uneasy world, offering a firm foundation of peace, maybe an entry point to witness. Jesus preached on the Mount of Beatitudes that, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Maybe his brother James heard this, or heard about it, because after the resurrection, and James started following his half-brother in earnest, he provides us with a beautiful example of making peace. In Acts 15, we learn about the First Council of Jerusalem. One of the major things under discussion was to what degree new believers needed to be Judaized in order to join the church. James stands up in verses 13 to 21 and provides a simple and acceptable compromise without the somewhat off-putting option of circumcision. This prevented an early schism and doubtless received the blessing commanded by God when brothers dwell in unity. Patience. God is frequently extolled in the Psalms for his patience. Jesus displayed this eternal attribute in his earthly ministry in many places. Even under the most extreme provocation during his trial, torture and execution, he showed loving patience to the very men committing the worst crimes that humankind had ever perpetrated. He even prayed through excruciating pain, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." That's Luke 23:34. There is an English idiom, the patience of Job. Even ardent skeptics have probably heard of the righteous man who lost everything and went through unspeakable affliction, but refused to curse God and die. His patience was rewarded by receiving more than he had lost, though this is not the point of the book. Even if Job had not received anything, he would have still been right for being patient. Patience is not merely waiting quietly in a warm station waiting room. It is about enduring hardship for as long as it takes and not losing faith. Think about Job when you are next in a traffic jam. Kindness. Sticking with that terrible night of Jesus' arrest and trial, we meet a man named by John as Malchus. Malchus was one of the detachment of soldiers who had come to arrest Jesus. I'm sure you know what the impetuous Peter did next. He detached the unfortunate man from his ear. Jesus knew what this man had in his heart. He knew the orders he was following, and he knew the impact this would have on him in a few short hours. Yet, in full knowledge of all of this, he was kindly disposed enough towards this enemy that he healed him. He loved his enemy, as he had earlier taught. Boaz is a lovely Old Testament example of kindness. The first words we receive from his mouth is a blessing to his employees. We then see that his character is such that he provides for and protects a foreign woman in whom he sees a noble character. That's Ruth. As a result of his kindness, he writes himself into the royal and even messianic line of Israel. In modern times, we may think of this as the waiter rule. That is, if a person is nice to you but not nice to the waiter, then they are not a nice person. Don't go on a second date. The easiest way to display your Christian character and kindness is to do to others as you would have them do to you. Luke 6:31. Goodness. The thing which first brought Jesus as a remarkable person to my mind, before I was a Christian, was the revelation that he was a man without sin. I considered myself to be a good person. I was an atheist at the time and made up my own scale of what good was. Yet I knew that I spent a reasonable proportion of my waking life sinning. I was totally humbled by the witness of multiple of his close friends, such as Peter, that Jesus didn't sin, even once. The gospel is literally the good news. Jesus declared himself to be the good shepherd, not only declared but demonstrated by genuinely and publicly giving his life up for his sheep. The books of Kings and Chronicles are replete with bad kings and false prophets. Against this dark backdrop, we find the brief flash of light that is King Hezekiah, as pictured here with a bulla bearing his seal, discovered in 2013. He is a righteous man, and he puts this into action by reinstating priests, that's 2 Chronicles 29:5, enabling all Jews to be involved in the festivals, 2 Chronicles 35, and destroying all the idols, 2 Chronicles 31:1. Goodness is not about doing what is easy or popular, but about doing what is right, regardless of the perceived cost. Being good in this way will set us apart and give us the ability to speak into people's lives, knowing that your motives are not solely earthly. Faithfulness. Back to that fateful garden. Jesus prayed while his disciples slept. Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done. Knowing what that cup held for him, still he drank of it, in faithful obedience to God's will. Hebrews 11, known fondly as the Hall of Faith, gives us many examples of faithful servants of God, and also typologies of Christ throughout the ages. Here we learn more about Abel, Enoch, and Noah, retaining their belief to the end. We also learn about Abraham, who had every reason to give up on God's promise to give him a son with his wife Sarah. They were both too old, and yet along comes little Isaac. We learn about Abraham receiving Isaac back from the dead, figuratively, through his faithfulness. The list goes on: Jacob, Joseph, Moses, the Hebrews, and even Rahab. Which story of faithfulness is your favourite? Tell me in the comment section. Gentleness. Jesus, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, made a definite choice of how to enter Jerusalem for the last time. Zechariah prophesied that the king would come lowly and riding on a donkey. The word lowly can legitimately be translated as gentle, and is so in Matthew 21:5, where the triumphal entry is described as fulfilling Zechariah's prophecy. For Greek geeks, the word is praus, and forgive my pronunciation, and is also used in the Septuagint rendering of the Zechariah verse. It must be remembered that meek does not equate to weak. It is often the strongest position in the face of opposition. Jeremiah was likely a type of this period in Christ's life, when he said of himself, "I had been like a gentle lamb led to the slaughter." In him we see a man cruelly mistreated, with every reason to lash out or give in. But instead, he stolidly persists in giving God's message to a rebellious people. This is someone to remember when our candidate utters awful blasphemies in response to solid argumentation. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Proverbs 15:1. Self-control. Remember Peter and Malchus? Did you notice the juxtaposition of Jesus and Peter? Peter loses control and lashes out. Jesus in complete control, yet the one in immediate peril, coolly, calmly, and with authority, heals Malchus and lovingly rebukes Peter. He adds, "Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels?" He doesn't call on these angels through his trial, his torture, or his execution. What astonishing self-control! When I think of self-control in the Bible, my mind immediately gravitates to David, between Goliath and the throne. That's before Bathsheba. Most of us will remember that David served in the court of Saul, until Saul became unhinged and tried to kill him. After that, David, rather than gathering the army to him and fighting Saul, which might have worked, or quietly assassinating him and taking the crown, which might also have worked, he went and hid from him. When I was in Israel, I visited the caves where he hid, and I recalled that he crept up behind a distracted Saul with a knife and sliced off a corner of his robe. He had his would-be murderer and persecutor in his power, but he chose to control himself. The result was that he is remembered around the world today as a man after God's own heart. That's 1 Samuel 13:14. Other examples include Daniel, who denied himself and put God first, and Esther, who ingratiated herself with the king at great personal risk and saved God's people. In modern times, there are a wealth of Christian lives to point to, exhibiting these traits. Some might spring to mind, like Martin Luther King, William Wilberforce, or Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Many others have earned biographies in Peter Master's books Men of Purpose and Men of Destiny. These are improving but humbling books to read. They can equip you with ready examples to slip nonchalantly into the conversation, such as Michael Faraday, Henry Hines, Daniel Defoe, or John Newton. Why not practice this now? Pick a fruit and try and think of a biblical or Christian exemplar of it. Leave your suggestions in the comments section for the improvement of the Way of the Lion community. Thank you for sailing with me through the seas of Christian example. Our learning aims in this session were to recognise and examine the value of Reepicheep's exemplary behaviour, which we did with reference to Eustace, the Dufflepuds, and us. Consider biblical examples in terms of the fruit of the Spirit, which we did one fruit at a time. And think about how we can see, be, and present an example to pre-Christians, which you did, maybe in groups or in the comments section, maybe just thinking about it yourself. If we have hit these targets together, then please consider liking this video. If you would like to continue our adventure, then please subscribe and click on the bell to be notified of the third part of the Voyage of the Dawntreader, when we will consider using a cumulative